Views on this program are opinions of dental industry experts and not necessarily those of dentist advisors. Opinions shared in the following interview do not constitute personal financial advice. This program is furnished by Dentist Advisors, a registered investment advisor. You're tuned into Dentist Money Industry Expert Series. Now here's your host, Reese Harper.
Welcome to the Dentist Money Show. I'm your host, Reese Harper, here on the Industry Expert Series today in sunny Southern California at the offices of Wood Delgado to introduce you to a friend of mine, Mr. Jason Wood, Counselor Wood. How you doing, sir?
I'm wonderful. It's
I feel like
actually Counselor Esquire.
Yeah, I just actually call you Counselor. Esquire Counselor. That's a good title.
Yes.
How come no other professionals get cool secondary titles like that?
Yeah, well, we make the laws, so.
Well, this is going to be a great interview. For those of you who don't know, Jason and his father, Pat, are probably some of the best-known dental attorneys in the country. They do everything and have a ton of experience, not just in the legal work they do, but they've got experience in consulting and finance and a lot of different areas just because they've seen it all. And I think the interview today is going to kind of hopefully focus on some things that are in Jason's wheelhouse that are kind of his area of expertise, so we can kind of highlight some mistakes that we've seen people make over the years. And then I might dive into some broader questions too to get Jason's opinion on different subjects and things that happen that we see as financial advisors and kind of go from there. So Jason, let's start with your background a little bit and how you got into the spot you're in.
Well, I went to law school and, I had worked at my father's firm in high school and kind of clerked with him during law school. And actually, I was going to become a DA, and the legal market wasn't that great when I came out, and so my dad was like, yeah, why don't you just come work for me for a little bit, see if you like it. And, I did. He gave me a baptism by fire, and basically, we would go over documents, and, point after point, he just nail it into me. What's wrong with this? How can you make this better? And that was probably for about a year. And, after that year, all of my colleagues were still doing research and still, basically in small little closets without windows, not being able to meet clients. And here I was, having conference calls with clients and with centers of influence and all these other things, primarily because I had, spent 80-hour weeks just getting inundated with the dental industry.
Yeah.
And so I grew to like it. I grew to love it, actually, because unlike everybody else, I'm not harming people. I'm not suing people. I'm not dealing with divorce. I'm not selling my soul, things like that. I really took to it because I feel that I'm changing people's lives for the better. And, so I kid around. Sometimes I'm part shrink, sometimes marriage counselor, sometimes, all these other things. And then sometimes, very, very seldom, I'm an attorney as well.
Yeah.
But I love it. I've to a very small extent, saved marriages. And
yeah, I think it's an important thing that people don't always realize about hiring somebody that's a specialist within their industry. Right. Is that the thing you're hiring them for isn't always the biggest value you get from them. You know, sometimes the attorney that you hire that is really experienced in acquisitions or transitions will give you a piece of advice outside of his scope that is so valuable because you would have never gotten it from any other place. An attorney's able to who specializes in dental and does a lot of transitions learns things that he would never have learned about dentistry any other way. And so I think that's one of the kind of underrated factors about working with a specialist like yourself is sometimes that the advice you get is way beyond the scope of why you hired them, right? You said seldom you're an attorney and a lot of times you're outside of that scope.
I honestly, like, doing the legal work is probably my least favorite. Yeah. I love getting to understand the deal, the people involved. the strengths and weaknesses of my client and how those relate to the practice or to the situation that's at hand. And, I think that actually is I guess a knock on our profession is attorneys don't typically spend that time getting to know the intricacies because that's not important to the legal aspects. But we view it much more of a global aspect. I really want to make sure that the client is going with the right practice or going with the right partner or doing a startup in the right location or, whatever it is business-wise. I mean, just yesterday, I spent an hour on the phone with somebody who, she came to me. She's very late in the deal, and she wanted to buy a practice that was only, in terms of revenues on a yearly basis, was only doing $260,000. Well, through a series of questions, I'm finding out that she produces as an associate $700,000. And so I'm like, why are you doing this deal? And it kind of took her aback. She's like, well, I'm asking you how much you charge to help me. Why is this any of your concern?
Yeah.
And I do
the paperwork.
Yeah.
Stop asking questions.
Yeah. Did I say you could talk? So, I mean, it does take people back because, it's against my economic interest to ask these questions. But I want people making the right decision. You only get this shot once.
Yeah.
Unless you're extremely lucky and you get a second opportunity. But, you have to go with the right practice. And so, this individual, if you're doing $700,000, you shouldn't be looking at a practice doing $260 because you're losing out on lost opportunity costs. Not only that, though, what I was trying to explain to her is it's actually going to harm your hand speed. It's going to harm these other things that are actually going to derail your growth in your profession. And so, those are the things that I like to talk about and really get involved with. And
make sure they make the right decision, not just a decision.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not just an order taker, right?
Exactly. But it's very easy to fall into that of, well, you called me, I know you've got a deal, and therefore let me just shut up and here's what I charge. But
totally.
I love educating. I love making sure that the people have the right information. Once we're all big boys and girls. I mean, once you have the information, then you have the ability, given what you know about yourself, to make the decision based upon the best information available. Yeah. And the problem with the dental industry is far too often we don't have the best information available. We're getting bits and pieces from all of these other sources that may or may not have your best interest involved or at the forefront. And so, I tell my clients all the time, hey, you've already paid me.
Yeah.
So I'm just giving you the risks and benefits, and you can choose to do what you want with that information. And so, and that's really how we approach things. It's not about ego. It's not about anything else. It's, hey, here's the information. What do you want to do with this?
Yeah.
So
I think that's really good insight. I think sometimes I talk a lot about the value of advice and how a lot of people, they discount the impact that advice will have on their trajectory. You talked about the situation. You get one shot at buying a practice, sometimes two, or there's 5 or 7 times in your life, right, when you're going to make a really consequential decision. It's like, how am I going to invest my money? What loans am I going to get?
Right.
Or what practice am I going to buy? Who's the office manager that I'm going to hire? There's some really kind of crucial moments where those decisions will change the trajectory of your net worth. Like your wealth will be meaningfully different. Your intellectual competency will be meaningfully reduced if you make a poor choice. I mean, both, your own intellectual competency, your clinical ability, and your net worth will be different if you make the wrong choice at that crossroads.
Right.
But a lot of people don't. I think they really discount the power of good advice, and it starts to get to the point where they compare advice like any other cost. So, if I'm going to go get a $50 steak dinner versus a $75 steak dinner, or a $100 steak dinner versus a $50, you know, a lot of times people...
It's still a steak, dang it.
It's still a steak, you know? And the same time, you know, I just think that there's commodities that are okay to like maybe make a cost-cutting choice, you know, cheaper car, maybe live in a smaller home, different neighborhood. But advice, like when you get advice from the wrong person, or you get advice from the wrong service provider, the wrong consultant, the wrong coach, the wrong equipment specialist, the wrong, you know, sundries rep. I mean, those people will set you on a trajectory that really changes the future of your wealth and your intellectual capacity, your clinical ability. And sometimes people really cut corners on who they get advice from. I think it's important to...
I love what you just said, because we as humans, we typically think of the here and now. We think of, okay, that's, you know, a $5 differential, or it's, you know, whatever. But we don't realize that when you extrapolate out, you know, it could be thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. And you kind of hit on something that I love discussing, and that is this whole idea of, and sorry, young dentists, I'm going to disparage you right now, but the millennials and this idea that acquiring a practice or going out in a private practice is risky, and I've been told that, you know, the security and the only way that I'm going to be able to satisfy my debt obligations and this and that, and I'm not. I understand that the debt obligations are real, but that we're inundated now with corporate dental. You know, just insert whoever, Heartland, Aspen, you know, whoever you want, and they are passing themselves off as the saviors of doctors, and unfortunately, what these young doctors don't realize is that actually is the riskiest thing that you can do, because you're going to receive $125,000, maybe even $150,000 salary, but you don't realize how much you're giving up. And when I explain to people that when you extrapolate that over a career, you're probably into the tune of $5 to $10 million. Yep. They look at you like I've got 2 or 3 heads on me. Yeah. Because they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And so, you know, you just have to show them. And the problem is that as Americans, as people who are built upon instant technology and instant information, we don't spend the time anymore to really think about it and extrapolate the information. And so I like to, you know, just give examples of that. You know, most doctors should be able to produce $500,000. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not, you know, the top 1% of doctors. It's really, you should be able to produce $500,000 in a year. Yeah. You know, $500,000 in a year is a little bit more than $40,000 a month. Mm-hmm. You know, and then when you extrapolate that down, you know, we're talking less than $2,000 a day in revenue and production. Yeah. And I believe everybody can do that. Yeah. And so, you know, you look at, okay, so $500,000 in a corporate chain, you're typically going to get 25% of your collection. So $500,000, 25, you're the math whiz, yeah. 125 mm-hmm. Of a salary.
I am the math whiz, by the way.
You are.
Thank you for labeling me.
I like the cape, by the way. It's quite dapper.
Yeah. So we're going to make $125K on $500,000 if I'm working for DSO.
So $125,000 as an employee. Mm-hmm. So that means that you're an employee. That means you're going to be taxed at the highest possible rate that you can, because you don't have write-offs and all these other things. But if I take that same $500,000, I really like to talk apples to apples because it's important. If I take that same $500,000 and I put that into private practice, what do I suddenly get? Well, now I'm the owner, and so I have $500,000 in doctor revenue. But I also now have a good practice should have at least 25% of their revenue in hygiene. Yeah. So now all of a sudden I have 25% higher, which is what, $650 now?
Yep.
I'm at $650 in total revenue. Mm-hmm. So now all of a sudden I'm getting $150,000 more in revenue just from the hygiene. And then if you use ADA statistics, you're about at 60% plus or minus overhead when you own a practice. So 60% of 650, now you're on the spot. I'm sorry.
Well, you're going to take home 40% of the 650.
Right.
So you're going to be at 240 plus another 20 grand, so 260.
So you're at 260.
Yeah.
Again, same $500,000 that we're talking about, and yet all of a sudden you're at double the yearly revenue.
Yeah.
And what I love then starting to talk about is, okay, but you're not really double. You're actually even more than that, because as a business owner in America, the tax basis is geared towards ownership. And so what I like to say is, and this is very simplistic, but every dollar that you make as an owner is worth about 10 to 15% more than that same dollar as an associate, as an employee. And so really that 260, you get another bump up of, 25 to 40 grand more in comparison to the 125 that you're making as an employee. Yeah. So now, we're talking about $150,000 differential per year that we own. Now you extrapolate that over, 30 years, and all of a sudden we're at 4.5 million differential.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even include, the investing capabilities. That doesn't include all the, the back end sale of the practice.
The compound interest of all the savings along the way. One thing that I think people tend to neglect too in that equation is, let's say you're at 650 and you're able to capture an equity exit, right? Of, call it 60% of the sales, or 65% of that 650. So let's say you're able to get, let's call it 400 grand in equity out of that sale at the end of your career. The thing that's interesting is people say, well, that's only 400 grand, right? I mean, 400 grand is, that's not a huge number, but that's after tax money, right? That's money that you'll pay capital gains tax on to net. Mm-hmm. So you'll have this bucket of 400 grand after taxes that you have sitting there. How many years of working for $125,000 a year does it take to save up $400,000 after taxes? Right. You could be talking 12 to 13. I mean, if somebody has a 25 or 30% savings rate on their 125 grand, which would be pretty successful. Okay, most people on 125 grand, they're gonna be able to save 10 or 15%.
Yeah.
On 200, maybe you could save more.
After all, we're entitled to this. Dang it! I'm entitled to spend my money.
I mean, we're talking about like just the equity value of that practice could literally be 12 working years of your life that it would take you to save up that much after tax money. And now, as you get more extreme and the practice gets bigger, I mean, it's still an applicable metaphor, right? I mean, it doesn't really change the ratios. The ratios actually get bigger. I
mean, if you're a huge producer in corporate, if you can do $1 million a year, you're going to make 250 in corporate, and that's, by the way, that is the top 5%, maybe top 10%. But then you just take those same numbers, you plug them in, and the divergence is even more.
Yeah,
and so
and not to and. I mean, this is a real issue, and it's probably one of the most consequential decisions a dentist is ever going to make. Now, there's some situations where the corporate contracts maybe aren't as tilted towards the DSO, and the doctor might have some equity value, or maybe it splits a little better. I mean, there's variations to this that aren't the worst thing you've ever seen.
Correct.
And so you shouldn't take this as law in every case. DSOs are not always bad in every situation.
No, but I am public enemy number one.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't want to lose that perch.
Yeah, so I like that. But the one thing I would say though, I'm a big economist, kind of history guy, and if you look back at like the history of the United States and the whole reason that we like left monetarism and why capitalism exists is because at some point there's in monetarism is like the economic system that like existed before we had capitalism, right?
Don't fall asleep.
Don't fall asleep, okay? Remember this, okay, people? This is what happens when you have a belief that that few people need to control all of the stuff, okay? So when very few people control everything, it's safer, it's simpler, it's more organized. That's the way that people think in China, outside of Hong Kong right now. Hong Kong's still pretty good. But, Great Britain was built on that principle, and they've had to move towards capitalism. Capitalism allows a belief where all of these dentists can go out and say, you know what, I want a piece of that pie. Right. And I might have to learn some things. I might have to actually spend some money like on getting advice and actually building my intellectual capital. I can't do this without any knowledge. But by just selling out too early and assuming that we just need to all consolidate and have this monolithic industry, I mean, it will bring less competition. You're going to have fee pressure that is not in the best interest of the dentist. You'll have less clinical competency. You're going to have no incentive to improve your intellectual capital of your practice and train your staff in a way that's competitive with a person down the road. Like, I'm a huge advocate of letting people build independent businesses, not just because it makes more money. It will, but it also makes better people.
You know, the more information you have, the more negotiating power you possess. And so the better you understand the business aspects, and I'm not saying you're going to learn them overnight, but the more you understand that, and here's the shocking thing, the better clinically you become as well.
Yeah.
And that may seem, I don't know, revolutionary, but the better you are at the business helps you to become more efficient, which helps you to be more clinically efficient, which helps you to be able to, you know, work your hygiene department correctly, which helps you to then be able to focus on taking a procedure that would be an hour long down to 45 minutes because you're much more efficient in all these other areas. And so they're not disparate elements. They are much more of a symbiotic relationship than people like to think. I at least I believe.
Yeah.
In you know, dealing with thousands of doctors.
Totally.
So
I just think a lot of people assume that running your own company means you have to be responsible for having a lot of knowledge in every area, and you've got to manage in a way that you're not capable of managing. And it's really not that overwhelming. It's just having the right team in place so that you can, and knowing, you know, it's hard to pick those people. I don't want to say that's easy, because if you don't have knowledge, it's probably hard to staff up your team and figure out who the right participants on that team are.
Right.
But let's say Jason Wood is the attorney that you hire to be on your team. If Jason tells you that he doesn't like your CPA, then why is that happening? Or if the CPA tells you they don't like Jason, why is that happening? Why aren't those two guys getting along?
By the way, many people will tell you they don't like Jason.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just get it out right now.
But if Jason sounds like he's making sense to you when you're talking to him because he's on your board, and someone else is saying, I don't like what this guy's saying, you need to ask yourself, why is that happening? You know, I mean, because a good board of directors, they can disagree, but they generally arrive at a consensus that's like good for the company.
Right.
And they know how to work together, and they get along, and they respect each other's opinions. And I think it's usually one of the problems with dentists getting advice and building this advisory board is the people that they're kind of comfortable with them just disagreeing, and they have like 5 people that disagree with each other and all have different agendas. And that's not really an advisory board. I mean, your board needs to be you have to get to a point where you're actually getting some consensus out of multiple people on your team. And right. I just see a lot of guys with dysfunctional.
Well, I say test. You got to test your advisors. You have to test everybody. I mean, the problem that I see is that as an industry, and yes, I'm stereotyping right now, so I apologize. The PC police can come later. But as a profession, the dentists typically don't like conflict.
Yeah,
and that is that's an issue that I think first and foremost you do need to conquer, in the sense that it is going to hold you back from being able to make some important decisions. We were talking about trajectories earlier, that are gonna literally transform your life to a positive. And I don't mean conflict of, hey, let's go get a bat. I'm talking about challenging. You should be able to challenge any advisor in your life. And it doesn't need to be confrontational. It just needs to be, challenging, so that, one, you understand things, but more importantly, that they are backing up their positions. And this, it's kind of a segue, but this goes hand in hand somewhat with humility, in that I tell a lot of my clients that the least important person in a practice when you're acquiring or sometimes even in a startup, is you, the doctor.
Yeah.
You are the buyer, and therefore you are the least important. It's the staff. It's all these other people that are more important because they have goodwill tied to them and things like that. And so it's hard for us as professionals to humble ourselves. But in those times of humility, I think that there's a lot of growth potential, a lot of education. And that's, the times that we're a little off balance are, I think, the greatest learning experiences that we can do. And so that applies to your employees. It also applies to your, whatever advisors you have, because you should know. You don't need to know a huge depth of everything, but you do need to know a little bit about all of these facets that we're talking about, financing and legal and accounting and, HR and all these other things. You don't need to know a ton, but you need to know enough just to be a little dangerous, I think. So
well, I think that's good advice, man. Let's I want to jump to another couple subjects real quick. So tell me, if you had to list in your experience the, 3 mistakes or 2 or 3 mistakes you see dentists make the most common when it comes to an acquisition or something, a legal transaction, what do you think that those would be? If you had to list a few things that just come up all the time where you're like, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse with this one.
Okay. I think that far too many people will go to a seminar and they won't realize that all of the information they are hearing is geared towards a specific purpose. So I always say, don't trust anybody. Don't trust me. Don't trust Reese. You need to keep your guard up everywhere. And what I mean by that is that you can't, for instance, there are a lot of people that say, I want to do a startup. And I want to do a startup here. And the reasons why I want to do a startup here are because either A, my family's here, or B, this is where I want to live, or I went to a seminar in Texas, or, something like that. And they don't do the research. They don't realize that, no, you shouldn't do a startup here because the demographics are poor or all these other aspects. So you need to spend the time if you want to do a startup, because startups are riskier than acquisitions. And understand that this is coming from someone who does acquisitions and startups. So I don't have a dog in the race on either one. But you have to do your homework for startups. I see far too many people moving into a saturated area because that's where they want to live. Yeah. And then doing a startup and then looking around going, why am I not growing? Well, you're not growing because there's not enough patients, for crying out loud. So I say for startups, you got to make sure that you have the demographics in your favor. I typically like 3,500 to 1 dentist to population ratio, because that almost basically ensures not just success, but that you're going to hit it out of the park.
And so you're saying the mistake, though, that you're cautioning people against when they go to an event, sometimes that event has an agenda that is not necessarily what the dentist should be thinking about?
Well, I think
Have your guard up.
Yes, but more importantly, I want them to do their homework, especially on startups, because on startups there are so many people that have very big commission checks built on convincing you
that it's time,
to do a startup.
That it's time, and this is the one, this location.
You need to do a startup. No, you shouldn't do an acquisition. And these are the reasons why you need to do a startup. So you have to be very cautious. I love startups when the demographics make sense. When you can sell me on the reason why this location, this area, whatever. Yeah. But I can tell you without a doubt that basically every metropolitan area in the entire United States does not need another startup. Yeah. If you want to do a startup, go where others won't go. And that kind of leads me to my next mistake is too many people won't go where others won't go. If you go to a rural area or to a less saturated area, you're going to be far more successful. Not because you're the greatest dentist, not because you're the greatest businessman, but because there's less competition. And when you have less competition, there's a much higher likelihood that you're going to be able to produce and make your practice more successful. Another mistake that I see in terms of acquisitions is not knowing your strengths and weaknesses as it relates to that particular practice. And so what I like to tell clients is you should be looking for practices that you can do at least 90 to 95% of the procedures that the seller does, that hopefully that seller is referring out procedures that you already do.
Yeah.
I mean, right there, that's a gold mine. If you can do all the procedures and the referring out things that you do, boom, let's do this. Let's do it ASAP. Another mistake that people make are not matching their skill set, their production skill set to the practice, and kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning, which is if you're a higher producer, you cannot be buying a low producing practice. Even if you double that practice that we were talking about earlier, you're still way below what you can produce as an associate. And so what I like to tell people is find practices. The minimum practice level that you should be looking at is what you can produce as an associate. So if you produce $500,000, you shouldn't be looking at any practices below $500,000.
So when a dentist, the pushback you're going to get to that is somebody's going to say, well, I just want to build it up. It's a value stock or something, right?
Okay.
It's something I'm going to kind of like build up, and it's a good deal. And then what do you generally follow up that with?
Okay, why is it a good deal? Why is it a good deal? Why do you think that you can grow this practice when the other doctor who's been there forever can't?
Generally, they won't have an answer for that.
Well, sometimes they do.
But if they do it, it might be.
Yeah.
I feel like he's just not doing procedures that I can do.
Okay,
right?
so let's talk about that. So,
Okay.
what procedures do you do versus him? What or her? What are the negatives that you see with this practice? Tell me about the location. I mean, there's like 20 different questions that'll go into that.
Yeah.
But then I'm okay being wrong.
Yeah.
I actually love.
That's just
being
a
wrong.
bias that it's okay. I mean, that's a bias you should have initially. Is don't buy a lower producing practice until you've been able to identify the rationale for why.
Absolutely,
it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to be wrong, but you kind of have to sell me on why I'm going to be wrong.
Because there's an opportunity cost of that lower production and the fact that the patient base might not match up with your ability to produce anyway. And
Absolutely.
it might be the wrong kind of patients. It
Right.
might be the wrong fee schedule. I mean, there's a reason why it's producing less and you producing more, right?
Right. A doctor can't just be old and not be doing marketing.
Yeah.
Those aren't good enough reasons.
Yeah.
There have to be better reasons than that.
Yeah.
This has 5 operatories. It's in a retail location. It's got great visibility. He has done no marketing. He used to produce, 800, 900,000, and it has nothing to do with external forces. It's just that he has gone from working 210 days to working 78 days. And, the local market, the local economy is still there. The demographics are still there.
It could support this much volume.
Yeah, exactly. And so then we're getting all these data points that are leading to, okay, well, maybe we can really grow this. And more importantly, we can grow it in a very short period of time. Because if you can tell me I can grow this, I can double this thing in 5 years, who cares?
Yeah.
It's going to take you 5 years to double, or we can go buy a practice that's already double and make double the money for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's the better practice to buy then.
Mm-hmm.
So it has nothing to do with, well, I think I can grow. It's what is the right practice for you, given all of these data points, given all of these variables, as it relates to you, as it relates to the practice, as it relates to the local, area. All of these things come into play.
Yeah.
And so far too many people don't look at it that way.
You just see a deal because it's cheaper than the next one.
Yeah.
Right?
And usually, that is probably the worst financial decision you can do is I'm buying this practice because it's cheap and I don't want to go into more debt.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing to convince people of is, and you probably deal with this a lot more than I do, is doing something like that actually places you at a higher risk of going into bankruptcy or not meeting your potential, because there's not enough cash flow in that practice to be able to support the debt threshold that you need. And the response is, okay, well, I've got my job. I've got another job that I'm going to, okay, well, worst case scenario, if you get fired, which by the way happens a lot when the owner finds out that you've bought a practice. But given the worst case scenario, you get terminated and you can't find another job, can you make ends meet? And a lot of times the answer is no. Yeah. But more importantly, can ends meet? It's, can I still be able to be paying off my debt in a very reasonable period of time, Or is this going to place a huge financial burden on me if I lose my other job and I bought this practice that really doesn't have the cash flow, that pays for my living expense needs, my note, everything else?
Yeah.
It's going to put a drain on you financially. It's going to put a drain on you from a professional standpoint. And worst, it's going to place a drain on your relationship, if it's your husband or your wife or whatever. And that, you know, I can only do so much in marriage counseling.
Yeah. Well, that decision definitely will put pressure on a marriage if there isn't already. I mean, that's a tough decision to recover from if you don't make the right acquisition decision. So I think that's great financial advice. Before we wrap up, I want you to give us one or two thoughts on, and you don't have to overthink this. I just want to say, what is the number one piece of financial advice you would give a dentist? Just give a piece of financial advice to a dentist.
Buy a practice as soon as you can, or start up if it makes economic sense. You want, basically what I care about is equity. So I want to make sure that you do that, because the sooner you do that, the better your career trajectory is. The quicker you're going to be able to satisfy debt, pay off debt, get debt free. Oh, and don't listen to Dave Ramsey when it comes to business financial decisions. He's horrible. He's amazing when it comes to personal. You know, I love saving and things like that, but don't listen to him on business financial. Sorry, segue. But the earlier you can do that, the more money you can make, the quicker you can get out of debt.
Yeah. It's great advice, man. Jason, thanks so much for taking the time today. It's a wealth of information. We'll have to do this again. We should probably go for 2 or 3 hours, and we'll reschedule here over the next...
I can pontificate to no end.
That's great. You know, I'm sure people love it. So I appreciate you taking the time, and it means a lot to see somebody who cares a lot about dentists and is thinking through the choices they make bigger than just the transaction that you're getting paid for. And I think that's a real sign of someone who's going to thrive and succeed over the next, in the future in dentistry right now. Because I do think most people understand the difference between education and sales, and they want to be taught. They want to know the truth about the decisions that are going to be best for them. And so I appreciate you having a good voice for financial literacy and good choices for dentists. So it means a lot.
I love it.
Good luck, man. And we'll wrap up and get this out to the listeners soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.